Hello, everyone. This is Ethos's first podcast interview. Ethos is a publication platform to tell stories of those in Hong Kong's medical community. I'm Ivan, the editor in chief of Ethos, and I'm very honored to welcome Dr. Sridhar here. He's a clinical assistant professor at the University of Hong Kong, and he's a trained clinical virologist. He specializes in infectious disease, and he played a prominent role in science communication during COVID-19. So, Dr. Sridhar, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Okay, so I'll start off today with COVID-19 and your role during that period as a science communicator, as a public educator. How did you come to fulfill this role?
Well, it's quite funny, really, because I am a clinical virologist, but my field of research is very far away from coronaviruses and COVID-19 in general. So, in 2019, the end of 2019, 2020, when COVID-19 took over the world by storm, I was in a position where I couldn't really contribute from a research perspective. I wasn't really willing to give up the kind of other areas of research I was doing and jump into COVID 19 research. So I wanted a way to kind of contribute. Because as a clinical virologist in Hong Kong, it gave me a certain perspective on things that perhaps other doctors would not necessarily have. So I actually started off with the objective of really letting my colleagues know about what we know about this novel virus, and just to um, keep things calm during a very chaotic time. So actually, my first objective was communicating to my peers, to my colleagues who might not necessarily have the same background to understand about this emerging health threat.
What was the most surprising or unexpected challenge you faced as a public educator?
I think the most unexpected challenge would be the levels of vaccine hesitancy we saw. Like, it was weird because in 2020 we were all like, all we need to do is to keep this under wraps, and then when the COVID-19 vaccines come out, everything's going to be fine. We're going to, well, reduce severe disease for sure, perhaps reduce transmission, and we can go back to normal. I think what took a lot of people by surprise is that when the vaccines did come out, you very rapidly had a counter vaccine movement, an anti-vax movement, if you like, which was very strong all around the world, and including in Hong Kong, especially with several social media groups cropping up very quickly, a lot of negative press. It very quickly became a situation where we had to counter a lot of misinformation, where previously we were just focused on getting a good vaccine to the public. Now we had to convince people to get it, and that was a major surprise, disappointment, and challenge.
Yeah, and especially in the period leading up to the fifth wave of COVID, when there was a large number of elderlies who were um, quite hesitant to get vaccines. And how do you deal with this misinformation when your target audience is not, like wealthy, educated people who read the news, but like people who don't read the news, people who are exposed to misinformation all the time?
It's extremely challenging, and to be honest, I don't think we've figured it out yet, because I think well, especially post COVID, I think we are living in a world where authority figures are viewed with extreme suspicion. I mean, and you're seeing that time and time again with new epidemic threats. For example, H5N1 in the US right now. You have the same kind of rhetoric about misinformation circulating about H5N1 that I saw back in the day about COVID 19. So, what can we do? I mean, as I can't say trusted figures, but as figures of some prominence in the field locally, all we can do is come out and say what we believe to be the truth. And basically, it's up to people to decide. But one thing is for sure, I think social media tends to select out for the voices that are most extreme. And I think the average person anywhere, right, is completely capable of reaching the correct decision about these things, about weighing different voices and deciding what they want to do. So I think we tend to catastrophize a little bit based on what we hear on social media. But I mean, give the average person their due. They're not dumb, and I think over time the truth will win out.
If you had the benefit of hindsight, what would you do differently?
Personally, I'm not sure, man. I mean, I talked to a lot of people during those few years, but I think as a society, we could have been a little bit more realistic about what we wanted from the whole vaccination campaign, in terms of saying something like what Singapore did say, you have 6 months to get vaccinated and then Hong Kong opens up no matter what. So if we had that kind of clear messaging, then I think it would have led to more people getting vaccinated in a short period of time. Instead, what we did was kind of try to delay the inevitable as much as possible. And everybody, I mean, the general public may have been lulled into a false sense of security, saying that we were going to keep zero COVID for the foreseeable future, with the strict quarantine measures and all that, which were simply not sustainable. And eventually, when Omicron came and it broke through our defenses, what could we do? I mean, there was absolutely nothing, and it was very sad because since December you saw it coming in. December 2021, you could really see that things were going to deteriorate very quickly in Hong Kong, and they did by February. And I think one of the saddest things was seeing all these elderly folks getting vaccinated in February of the Omicron year, just before the fifth wave, and then getting COVID like 4 or 5 days later when the vaccine wouldn't have taken effect yet. And that was difficult to see because it was so preventable.
Do you think we are prepared for the next pandemic?
Prepared, yes. I think there are two sides to that question. From a science perspective, the quality of science and the brilliance of the people who worked on the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of vaccines, antivirals, diagnostics, absolutely fantastic. And last time you saw that from the time they said there was a pandemic to the time we entered phase 3 clinical trials for vaccines was less than a year. And I think in the next pandemic we'll do even better. It's probably going to be even shorter than that. And I don't just mean the big pharma companies, I mean institutions in Hong Kong. So for example, the vaccine from our department took a few years, but it made it through phase 3 clinical trials and was launched in China as an inhalation vaccine. And that whole process is going to be much quicker in the next pandemic. So we're in a fantastic position scientifically. I've learned so much as an early career researcher from reading science during this pandemic. On the other hand, you can have all the vaccines and diagnostics and antivirals, but if people don't trust authorities and they don't buy that there is a problem and we have a solution, then we are in deep trouble. You can have the best vaccine in the world. If nobody gets it, then it's just like Hong Kong and back in the fifth wave, right? If nobody gets it, it doesn't matter. So I think in that sense, we're not prepared at all. And I very much fear that if there's another pandemic, we're going to end up down the same road of discord and misinformation as we did back in those few years. So I'm both optimistic and pessimistic about it. Yeah.
Speaking of how sped up the vaccine trials were, do you think normally like they last 10 years, but in COVID they lasted a year? Do you think that contributed to vaccine hesitancy?
It did. It certainly did. But what people don't understand is what normally takes 10 years is because of inefficiency in getting through different stages. It's not like there is additional scrutiny and oversight and kind of safety checkpoints during those 10 years. It's just that there's a lot of uncertainty about funding, about getting through these bureaucratic hurdles, to register your product for use in humans and then going through phase 1, 2, 3. It's a very painstaking process. In COVID, all those, because everybody was aligned towards getting a vaccine out there, so, and funding was not an issue. So we just saw that this whole 10-year inefficient process could be basically streamlined to the stage of phase 3 RCT in a very short period of time. There's basically no difference in the process. It's just much more streamlined, and different companies are doing it in parallel. And you have a huge number of infected people, so your clinical trials can be run much quicker. And there you go. You've got this amazing safe product in a very short period of time, where before it used to take years and years and years, and now it's just more efficient. But remember, whenever you run a randomized control trial, no matter where in the world, you're going to be only looking at a few thousand, maybe 10,000 plus participants. It's only when it goes out into the real world that there are some safety signals that might come out, which was the case with the COVID-19 vaccines as well. So shortening that process to phase 3 RCT is not going to jeopardize safety at all, because the proof of the pudding is really post-launch, right? And COVID-19 vaccines did very well there as well.
So moving on to more personal questions about medical school. When did you know you wanted to do medicine?
Well, I don't know if I ever knew that I wanted to do medicine. I think I recall my parents, having that conversation when you were 14 or 15 and asking what you want to do. It's just medicine is the only thing that kind of popped up in my head at the time. I must admit I had never given much thought to it. And I thought a lot about why I said medicine back then, and I still don't know. So, and I think that applies to a lot of 15, 16, 17-year-olds who want to get into medical school. It's very difficult for them to give an answer as to why they want to do medicine when they don't even know what it involves. Even if you have a family member who's in medicine, it's very difficult to envisage what that actually means, which I guess applies to other professions as well. But in terms of the emotional context in which we work, it's a very unique profession, I must say, and it's very difficult to know ahead of time why one would want to do it. But yeah, I said medicine for some reason, and I stuck to that, and ended up in HKU in 2005. Yeah.
So speaking on that, Hong Kong's medical school, like the application process, places a very heavy emphasis on your academics, your grades, and there's no requirement for attaching in the hospital, for example, and that students might not really know what medicine is about. Do you think medical school application, like the screening criteria, should focus on your students' extracurriculars, their attaching hours, their volunteering hours? Or do you think it should still be on grades?
Great question. I've thought about this a lot. I think grades are important as a reflection of a certain skill you need in medicine, which is simply put, memorization of large quantities of information. And the only kind of key that the clue we have to that skill is the grades that applicants obtain during secondary school. But as I've observed among my colleagues, I think there are many people who have perfect grades, who are absolutely suited for medicine, who absolutely love it. And there are also many people going through medical school and eventually graduating who find that it's perhaps not their cup of tea. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's very important to look at other aspects of students' lives apart from grades. But honestly, it's very difficult for us, as gatekeepers, because these are qualitative, and it's very difficult to assess them. Whereas with grades, you have a number. So I think with most things in life, a qualitative assessment of a person as a whole is much better than a number. But it is also a fact of life that it is much more difficult to do a qualitative kind of assessment of the hundreds of applicants we get, which is perhaps why we end up relying heavily on the quantitative aspect. But I think the nice thing about the application process is there's still an interview. And I think people complain about interviews, they're inherently subjective and there's no fixed rubric to grade people on. But I think that brief kind of qualitative assessment, if you will, of an applicant has tremendous value, right? And as I look at this process, I think the qualitative trumps the quantitative every time in terms of who a person actually is. But I think applicants also have to understand that it's challenging, it's difficult to do.
Yeah. What about adopting like a UK or like US model of medical school admissions?
Um, I don't know enough. I mean, I think applied to a few UK medical schools back in the day. Obviously, didn't get in, but I think back in the day it was, at least my experience was quite bad, right? I mean, I just dumped in my grades in UCAS or whatever, and then they just gave you a reply with absolutely no justification. I don't know if things have moved on since then, and I haven't had the opportunity to study the way they think do things, but it's difficult. There is something to be said for the US system, though. In that, I like the pre-med idea a lot, and I mean, we have a lot of first degree holders who then end up in medicine, and I'm immensely impressed by them. They have a level of maturity, and I think they've also been in kind of a workplace environment as well, and I think they're closer than secondary school students to understanding what a career in medicine means, right? It's not a bad thing by any means. So I think first degree is usually a benefit. Yeah.
Do you have a message for young medical school applicant and early year students in medical school in HKU or CU or HKUST in the near future? Do you have any advice for them?
Well, I think getting into medical school, as we just covered, is I think a fairly straightforward proposition these days. I don't know, because back in my day, like in 2005, there were 100 or 110 people, students. So that's my class size, 110. And now it's not, right? It's actually increased. And has our population increased proportionally? Probably not. So you actually have a lot more spots available. So there's so much opportunity now. The most important thing is to do well in secondary school, be all rounded, do well in your interview if you're in. Okay. I mean, I'm sure you guys have camps and training sessions that would be much, much better than what I just said, but there you go. Once you're in, I think the most, it is a big transition from secondary school to university life, as I'm sure you experienced at some stage yourself, right? I mean, in you suddenly go from kind of the secondary school coaching model to something that is much more personally driven. Don't know, right? You have to look through your learning materials yourself, your e-learning sets and all that, and it takes a certain degree of motivation and drive, and you can lag behind very quickly. So I think the main advice, if you will, is invest a little amount of time every day on getting through your schoolwork, and don't leave it to the till the last minute, because that leads to tremendous stress, which is also going to affect your performance adversely. So it's just a little bit of time, most days of the week. If you want, take time off, look after yourself, have other interests by all means, but also understand that you're in a commitment with a program that is traditionally perceived to be very difficult, and the way to um, excel actually is just to commit that x amount of hours per day, and that amount of hours per day will depend on what kind of a learner you are. I was a slow learner, so it was longer. Some people are very quick, photographic memory, eidetic, and they require much shorter periods of time. So it's just a little bit of investment per day, and it's going to bring rich rewards.
Did you do any extracurriculars while in medical school?
So I did health exhibition. I don't know if that's still a thing. So it was under MedSol. They had a subgroup called health exhibition, that within the first 2 years of medical school, we actually had to set up an exhibition on a health related topic in a public space in Hong Kong, right? So we did that in Chun Wan and Tsim Sha Tsui. We set up a kind of exhibition on sleep quality. So that was yeah, quite a process as well. So that was fun, I think. Yeah. And but I think after you, we didn't have enrichment here in my time, so we had something called special study modules during summer. So you could go off and do stuff like I did a I did a yoga teachers training thing, and some mindfulness meditation kind of training, if you will, in my uh, summer. Yeah.
Yeah. So next topic is about uh, your article that you published called "The Morgue" on Ethos. Can you tell us what was that about? What motivated you to write it?
Okay, we are kind of in the Department of Microbiology, we're looking at emerging infectious diseases. So we are very concerned or interested about new and emerging pathogens, right? And one of the populations that we do look at very closely is people who suffer severe disease or even mortality, and the cause is not completely clear. So that piece was referring to an incident when I was still a trainee. So it's probably more than 10 years now, where there was somebody, a young patient, who had had a sudden cardiac death. And who had had an antecedent febrile illness. So we were suspecting an infection leading to the death, and the deceased individual was now in a morgue, and we had did not have adequate samples taken ante-mortem. So I actually had to go and collect the samples at the morgue. And I mean, and this is something that actually most doctors are not used to, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with life and maintaining life. And the wards are, whatever you make of it, is full of life insofar as life is suffering. It's life. Do you know? And you have these, and you have it represented very overtly with cardiac monitors, beeping, and people's heart rates, and vital signs. Okay, it's so vital, vitality. It's all around you in the ward. And whenever somebody passes, they're quickly cordoned off, as it were. The curtains are drawn. Patients, the families of the patient gather at the bedside, and it's something that is kind of hidden from the rest of the ward, and life literally goes on. Do you know? But I think so most doctors are not used to the morgue scenario, where it's completely the extreme, and the living person is kind of the exception to the rule, to what is there. So um, that piece was written as a response to what I experienced there, having to collect samples from this patient in what almost felt like a violation of this individual. Although we are trying to help the family perhaps find closure, or we are trying to help society find a reason for this occurrence, potentially other patients, but it's still something that felt uh, surreal or strange at the time.
Has being a doctor or clinical experience changed your personality?
100%, absolutely. Bear in mind, I came in as one of those completely dreamland ignorant. I think I shouldn't say that. Secondary school students nowadays are much, 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 much smarter than I was back in the day. And I think I speak for a lot of my classmates. We were yeah, in our own world a lot of the time. I think now the youth now is so much more engaged, and you've given so much more thought to society and things, and I think social media plays a role in that as well. Now everybody's plugged in. I mean, I came into secondary school not knowing much about anything, so in a way, my personality was very much formed during my professional training and specialization, and the stuff you see in the wards. And um, I think it's true for every doctor. I mean, you can't go through that process of seeing people, suffer or get better. There are happy endings, of course. There are very sad endings too. There are endings that are just neither happy nor sad, and you can't go through that whole visceral process without it changing you somehow. And yeah, I won't call it a. These are good scars in a sense. In that, I think you get a absolutely unique perspective on life that I think people outside the profession would also acquire when at some stages in our life, when unfortunately death happens to people that are around them, and it is also something that they go through. But I think we as doctors are exposed to that side much quicker. It is possible to develop a shell around yourself and go through it without changing fundamentally as a person. But I'm definitely not one of those people, and I think it yeah, absolutely, it made me who I am today, for better or worse.
So turning to a much more lighthearted question, if you discovered a microbe and you had the naming rights over it, what would you name it?
Hmm. So tradition in our department, it's very difficult to depart from tradition. Tradition in our department is to name it after Hong Kong or HKU, or China. We have many sinences as well. Okay, so I think the days when you name microorganisms after yourself is sadly over, you know. And it's very difficult, you know. You name a microorganism after yourself and then you get into some scandal in the future, then what do you do with the name? It's stuck forever. That happened to a French microbiologist whose name is now scum, but unfortunately he has a few bacteria named after him. So every time you see that name, you're kind of like, "Ah, I shouldn't have named it after him," you know. So I think I'll stick with the tradition of naming it after an institution that will live on after my time. And I think, and honestly, I got to tell you, pathogen discovery these days is a team effort. Do you know, gone are the days when you had Pasteur or, you know, Kitosato or one of these great microbiologists just looking at it under a microscope and literally culturing and doing all the work themselves. So it's kind of wrong for me to, you know, just name it after myself. Maybe I could name it after something else apart from the institution or myself or the place, but that I would need to think about that. You know, name it after a musician or something like those asteroids. They, you know, they
Um, so we'll be interviewing Dr. KY Yoon in a few weeks. Do you have any questions that you would recommend us to ask him?
with Prof, it's all about stories. You gotta his stories are fun. Yeah, I don't know if you've read his autobiography. There are some very interesting stories. The stories are of two types with Prof Yun, right? It's about his formative experiences during his youth, you know, the kind of things that made him who he is today, and also I think his descriptions of some of his thinking behind some of the outbreak investigations that he's done. I'll tell you now, why am I a microbiologist today? It's actually, uh, it's not like I loved bacteria or viruses in medical school. I hadn't given it much thought, to be honest. I'm a drifter, right? So I just drift through medical school. I'm into internship. I don't know what to do. Perhaps something in internal medicine because I know my hands are absolutely worthless for surgery. So then I did an attachment in infectious diseases in Singapore by accident. I was rejected for cardiology, right? And I loved it. So I came back and kind of did an attachment at the Department of Microbiology here. And the first day, Prof. Yun was gave us a talk on a cat measles virus, so it's feline morbillivirus, and the thought process behind the discovery of that pathogen. And I tell you, that got me hooked because where else can you, you know, kind of practice medicine during the day and talk about these animal pathogens, you know, during lunch, and actually have a shot at discovering something completely new. And I think that really got me hooked on it. So actually, it was his storytelling really that I think you should bring out in your interview, and it's very inspirational.
What's your most unforgettable story that you'd always tell at a party, or what's your favorite story to tell?
I guess for me, the story that kind of changed my life in terms of research trajectory, at least professionally, was the discovery of rat hepatitis C virus as a human pathogen. So, I mean, for the audience, I mean, hepatitis C is something that causes inflammation of the liver. And in 2017-18, I played a pretty big role in discovering that hepatitis C virus from rats could actually jump to humans and cause human disease. And I always remember this. Like, the moment of discovery. I was not in the lab. I was at Pacific Coffee in the hospital, and then our scientific officer actually called me. I asked him to do a test on different types of hepatitis C virus in a very strange patient who had mounted antibody responses but didn't have circulating hepatitis C viremia. Then he called me. I still remember where I was sitting. He called me and said, Dorset, you need to come over right now. So it's about 6 p.m. or something in the evening. And he said, I've got the sequencing results back and it looks like it's something completely new. And I can sense the excitement in his voice. And I just rush back. And I always remember us sitting together in front of his computer screen and seeing something that nobody had ever seen before, a completely new virus that was jumping from rats to humans. And I think that kind of eureka moment of excitement is something that uh, yeah, we always want to feel again, that rush, as it were. So I think that's kind of my favorite story, and completely drove what I've done for the last 7 years on, and it's ongoing, right? So it was a moment that completely defined what I am as a clinician scientist, as it were.
So people nowadays, they like to use pens to poke onto a elevator button or using a key. Should we start using our thumbs? Is this relevant? Is this important?
Right. I think a lot of people, including myself, in the early days of the pandemic, got this completely wrong. We extrapolated information from for other respiratory viruses when we thought that surfaces were very important. So surface disinfection is really important. But I think the consensus after years into the pandemic is that COVID-19 is airborne. So people catching COVID-19 catch it by breathing it in. So the population who actually presses a lift button and then rubs their eyes and catches COVID, or who gets it from frozen fish, is basically negligible compared to people who just catch it through the air. So personally, for me, I'm an index finger guy. So I go into the lift and I just push it in really hard with complete extension, of
And
the
then lick
distal
it.
interphalangeal joint. And I don't care, right? Because even if there's some pathogen on the lift button, at least when you're in the hospital, you're masked, and we wash our hands from time to time. Things are going to be absolutely fine. Yeah. So, but I must admit, it's still a little bit of a relief when somebody pushes it for me, because it's just a kind of obsessive compulsive shadow of those few years. But nah, just use your fingers.
With regards to the pandemic, to clinical care, do you have a message that you want to tell people who are not in medicine, to people who do not have a background in clinical science?
Sure. I think the main message that I want to get across is that there are very few certainties in life in any area, right? If you look at the economy, if you look at the financial sector, stock market, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Who knows what we're going to find out the next day? And it's the same with science. It's a process of evolution through iteration. So you have these repeated experiments to refine our understanding of reality. So the next time a pandemic comes over, don't it is not wrong to have a certain level of um, distrust towards the authorities, or feeling that scientists are not completely right, because that's probably right. It's an evolving process. None of us are completely close to the answer. Do you know what I mean? So for right now, there's an H5N1 outbreak in the US from dairy cattle. What is the risk to humans? It's a lot of debate on social media. Everybody has their opinion. But I'll say one thing: the scientists who are actually studying this on a day-to-day basis um, are probably closer to an understanding of the risks, or closer to an understanding of the real situation, compared to some KOL who has their opinion because they want to sell some um, alternative medicine solution to you, right? So respect where it's due, in a sense, in that the scientists who are spending day and night working on this probably are closer to the real solution. than a random stranger just um, who's just opining on this point to get more views or likes or whatever.
So, last question, perhaps a much deeper question. What is the meaning of life?
Okay, I should have seen that coming, but I remain unprepared. Uh, I think the meaning of life. I think the nice thing about life is that it doesn't have the same meaning for everyone in a sense, and you get to define it. Do you know what I mean? It's not like uh, y- everybody's meaning of life has to be the same. You can find meaning in a lot of things in life, and it's up to you to define. And when you find it, it just clicks. Do you know what I mean? So some people find meaning in charitable pursuits, some in research, some in athletic excellence, whatever it is, the moment you know, it just clicks, and that is completely meaningful. And we all know that because we all go through life as if it has meaning, and that means it does in a sense. So it's great that we don't have a fixed definition, and that's what makes society as a whole progress in a sense, because we all find meaning in different things, and we all find meaning in our lives in different ways. And and I think the meaning it there, and the other nice thing is there doesn't have to be a single meaning. You can find a certain meaning when you're at work, you can find a certain meaning at home with your family, and you can find a certain meaning outside these environments. As you age, that meaning keeps changing as well, and that is the nice thing. And but sooner or later you realize that all these meanings are one and the same, and I think I'm kind of getting there now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Dr. Sridhar, thank you very much for your public service in research, in fighting fake news, and teaching in clinical care. It's a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.